task because there was no good option. We've been through this before. We invaded Afghanistan. We invaded Iraq. We are still managing both countries, Afghanistan more than Iraq. But you have to insert yourself as a country into the political solution, which was something the Obama administration felt was not in our national security interest. Right. Well, that has been furthered by President Trump, who has a more nationalist take on this, who wants other people to do it. But this now, so he's gone after Putin on this. What is he prepared to do to force Putin's hand? Because I'll tell you one thing, Putin believes it's in his national interest to control access to that deep water port.
They call what we see with these scenes of the people on the ground outside Damascus a hoax, okay? And we've heard that word too much in our own political dialogue here. But, all right, let's talk about a little bit of this aspect that's not as sexy, but it should be more relevant to the American people. So I did the interview with then President Obama about the red line. It was the first one that he did when he was deciding, and he kind of went within 12 hours from slow down, we don't even know what happened yet, to we should take action, to I'm going to Congress, right? Now, that's the part I want to talk about. Because whether it was in Syria or what happened in Libya, you could make the case that a president doesn't have the authority to unilaterally take military action in situations like this. I know you guys argued that what you did in Libya was okay, saying it's not hostilities because you're not on the ground. But I don't know how, when you use military force to kill people from a sovereign nation, it's not a hostile act. But that's a legal argument. But this should all fall on Congress. Obama wanted to go to Congress about Syria. They didn't want to do it. Trump is obviously of two minds about this stuff. He always has been. So you're going to have generals basically coaxing him to take action that is specifically within the purview of Congress. Do you think that this action needs to be taken up by Congress in some way, John Kirby?
If they're going to go the military route and only the military route, yes, of course they need to have a conversation with
Didn't happen last time when they used the Tomahawks.
Well, but if you remember, Chris, go look at the statement that the president put out after that missile strike. He talked about it being in his determination in the national security interest to conduct that strike in response to violations of international law by the use of chemical weapons. So, and that is another reason why they justify just doing the one set of strikes and nothing more. So he has precedent on this that he could fall back on if he wants to do another round of missile strikes. But
doesn't mean he has precedent. It wasn't tested by Congress. All these senators stand up and talk about this. Well, we don't know. We don't know. Yeah, I know you don't know. But they're supposed to debate it. They keep kicking this ball down the road.
You're right, Chris. If, in fact, you're going to try to find a military solution to the civil war in Syria, and it's going to be a long-term intervention, yes, of course they need to go to Congress. I just don't think they're there. I think they are going to discuss military options. I think there will be sort of retaliatory options like we saw a year ago. But I think and I disagree. I don't think he's going to be coaxed by the generals to get militarily involved. I mean, he'll be given options, but I don't think it's in the military's interest. I don't think the Pentagon leadership wants a protracted intervention inside the civil war in Syria. They want to stay there to fight ISIS, and that's the limit of their interest.
This is also going to test. The president has a new national security advisor in John Bolton, who is hawkish on these matters, who at the end of the Bush administration wanted to attack Iran over its nuclear program. This is a test of what this administration wants to do in terms of asserting its influence on the world stage, because short of an invasion of Syria and the commitment of troops and assuming all that entails militarily, politically, diplomatically, and in a sustained way, then you're going to have to engage these other powers who are involved in the fight and try to be persuasive. The administration has shown no interest in doing that. The Obama administration tried to do it and didn't succeed. These are hard issues. But I do want to underline one point that you raised before, Chris. Here you have Russia saying that these pictures that we're seeing on our screen, the foaming at the mouth of children, is a hoax. Do you think that gives President Trump some pause when he talks about fake news and things being, unreal? That this is what tyrannies do. They use this kind of language to invalidate the suffering and the real events that people are going through. Is that what America wants to do when we throw around things like fake news and this is a hoax? Because this is somebody like Putin using it and kind of waving it in our face. I think that's something for the president to think about.
So back to John Bolton for a moment. We do have a clue as to how John Bolton feels about this and what John Bolton will advise the president to do now that John Bolton is the national security advisor and takes over today. This was him talking about Syria after a different chemical attack in 2013. So listen to John Bolton.
Well, I would not have referred the matter to Congress, and I think if I were a member of Congress, I would vote against an authorization to use force here. I don't think it's in America's interest. I don't think we should, in effect, take sides in the Syrian conflict.
That's interesting, John Kirby. What do you think? How do you think that will inform what happens today?
Yeah, I think that he's been pretty consistent on this. I mean, you know, everybody talks about Bolton being this war hawk, and if you really read what he has written and listen to the speeches he has given, he is much more nuanced than that. He is hawkish when he believes an incident is in a direct violation or is harmful to national security interests. Yes, he will be hawkish. But when he doesn't believe it's in our national security interests, and he's been pretty clear the civil war in Syria has not raised to that level, then he's going to advise against interventionism. And I think he'll probably, my guess would be consistent with that. He will be supported by, I think, many in the Pentagon, as I said before, who aren't interested in another ground war in the Middle East. That's why I think it's really important, and this gets to something that David's been talking about all morning, that they have to have a political strategy here for the civil war. They have completely, the Trump administration, abdicated any leadership in the diplomatic process led by the UN to try to bring the civil war to a close. They have given that over to Russia and Iran. And yes, President Obama focused more on that without the leverage of military force. Trump has used military force before. He could use that again as leverage to get back in the game diplomatically and try to end this war. And you can do that without necessarily having to commit large ground forces into a big
You already have a decent number of people on the ground there, you know, just so people know. I know we call them support troops and all that. But, you know, John, you know that that's just some BS nomenclature. When you're on the ground in places like that, you're exposed to risk.
Sure.
And they're sitting on the ground there right now, and it's not an easy situation.
Right, but they don't have enough forces there to affect a political outcome. And I think this becomes important, which is, I think, to John's point and what John Bolton was saying in that clip, is we may find that this administration says, you know what, Assad's a bad guy, and we will take action to kind of put him back in his box if he crosses the line on chemical weapons, but we're not going to throw him out of power because we'd rather have, we'd rather live with Assad and have Syria be ISIS-free. That's in our national security, rather than take on the big fight of Assad and what would come next.
I agree. If you, again, go back and look at how the president articulated the strike a year ago, he said it was in our national security interest to strike back when somebody uses chemical weapons in violation of international law. I would be looking for that same kind of logic this time around, trying to find a way to go ahead and reassert that national security interest and probably nothing more.
But that logic is dependent on the United Nations making the same determination and asking for international action. It never happened. So I don't know how that gives them a legal basis. But we'll talk about it. This isn't going away. We'll talk about it again.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks.
Would Congress authorize? He's a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Good morning, Senator.
Allison, it's good to be with you.
Good to have you. When the president says there will be a big price to pay in Syria, what does that mean to you?
Well, Allison, it's in the interest of the civilized world to make it clear that chemical weapons cannot be used. And the United States is a leader of the civilized world. So we need to work with our international partners. First and foremost, we need to work with the United Nations and hold President Assad accountable for his war crimes. I introduced legislation a year ago, a bipartisan legislation with Senator Rubio, that made it clear that President Assad needs to be held accountable for war crimes in the civil war.
And
Secondly,
just to stop you there, I'm sorry,
authorized...
Senator, just because you introduced this legislation, Senator Rubio, what would that mean? What would, I mean, obviously Assad has never been held accountable, so what would that look like?
It would require the United States to preserve the evidence against President Assad, to provide technical assistance in the preparations of the trial material, and to work with the United Nations to establish a war crimes tribunal in regards to President Assad. That should have been done a year ago. It passed our committee. It's time for the Congress to act and our leaders to work with the international community to do that. President Assad should be held accountable for war crimes. We say never again, but we see over and over again these types of atrocities being used by leaders of countries, and this time the president of Syria.
Do you
but then we also need to...
But just quickly, do you think the U.S. should respond militarily this time?
I was going to get to that. Secondly, Congress authorized sanctions against both Russia and Iran last year. The Syrian regime cannot exist without the support of Russia and Iran. And we need to take action against both Russia and Iran, making it clear that they need to act to control what President Assad is doing. And the use of military force is something that the president needs to work with Congress. That's a requirement. And I hope as Congress returns today, there'll be close consultations between Congress and the president so we can act in unity in America and with our international partners.
And if there were a vote today on an AUMF, an authorization for military force, how would you vote?
Well, it obviously depends on we're not going to authorize the use of sustained presence in Syria for the civil war. We do have a responsibility with the international community to root out ISIS wherever ISIS may be found. We need to redefine that AUMF for ISIS. But in regards to Syria, our immediate concern is to make it clear that President Assad needs to be held accountable for his war crimes. Yeah. And we must make it clear that chemical weapons has no place in our civilized world.
I understand, but just how about military force here? I mean, not a sustained action. Let's just say a military response. How would you vote?
Well, it depends on how that is presented. If there needs to be consultation between the leaders of Congress, our committee, and the White House, working with the international community to determine what should be the response. If a military option is chosen, my expectation is it's not going to be a sustained operation. That may or may not require specific approval by Congress.
Yes, I understand. But you personally, do you think the U.S. should respond militarily to this?
I think the United States needs to work with international partners, and it needs to be more than just considering a military option. It needs to hold Assad accountable and to undermine his support with Russia and Iran. I think that's critically important so we don't have another chemical weapon attack 6 months from now or 3 months from now.
Is that a no?
No, it needs to be part of a package. Work with the international community. There are steps that can be taken. I supported what President Trump did after the last attack. I thought that was a measured response. It had a definitive message, and there was no sustained operations. It gets more complicated now that he's done this again.
President Trump has talked behind the scenes, according to CNN reporting, about pulling troops out of Syria, U.S. troops out 6 months from now. Publicly, he has said, I want them out. The time is now. I mean, he has said, in other words, the time frame was even shorter when he said this at a rally earlier. What do you think about that? Is it time to pull U.S. troops out?
Well, we certainly don't want U.S. troops involved in a civil war in Syria. Our presence there have been focused on getting ISIS, which is located also in Syria, which is complicated by the civil war in Syria itself. I do not support U.S. presence in Syria as it relates to the civil war. As it relates to ISIS, I think the president a long time ago should have sought specific authorization for the use of force. It should have had a finite mission and a finite length, and making clear what our military objectives are. We don't have that today.
There's some political news back at home. Governor Rick Scott of Florida is expected to announce that he will be running for against Senator Bill Nelson for Senate in Florida. Does that worry you?
I think Bill Nelson has an incredible record on behalf of the people of Florida. They know him well. He has represented the needs of the people of Florida during the natural disasters, during economic opportunities. I think he's done a great job, and I think the people of Florida know that.
Mike Pompeo, his confirmation hearings will be, I believe, this Thursday for Secretary of State. You did not support him as CIA director. How do you feel about him becoming Secretary of State?
I'm meeting with him tomorrow, and the confirmation hearings are later this week. I have lots of questions. I want to make sure he'll be an independent voice in the White House for diplomacy, for speaking up for American values. I'm very interested in his views as it relates to America's participation in the climate talks, America's living up to our responsibilities in the Iran nuclear agreement. He's expressed himself in several of these areas that are contrary to what I would like to see the policy of this country. I recognize the president makes these decisions, but I want to make sure that our top diplomat understands American values.
Days before the 2016 election. That attorney, Michael Avenatti, joins us now. Michael, great to have you here.
Good morning.
So a couple of weeks ago, you asked a judge to be able to depose the president and Michael Cohen, and the judge said that was premature, didn't give you permission. So now what's changed?
We filed the motion, and the court found that we had filed it too early, basically denied it without prejudice, meaning we had the ability to refile it. We refiled it last night. It's going to be heard in the first week of May.
But what's changed in those 2 weeks? I mean, why now? Is it not too early?
Well, it's not too early now because the other side has filed what's called a motion to compel arbitration, which the court had found had to be filed first.
I see. You were quite excited on Thursday, I believe, or Friday, whenever it was last week, when the president on Air Force One had this moment. Let me recap it for everyone.
President, did you know about the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels?
No, no.
Why did Michael Cohen make it if there was no strings around the case?
Well, you have to ask Michael Cohen. Michael's my attorney, and you'll have to ask Michael Cohen.
Do you know where he got the money to make that payment?
I don't know. No.
You called that Christmas and Hanukkah wrapped together a gift to you. He's saying that he doesn't know anything about it. Why is that such a gift?
Well, this is what happens, Allison, when you have a client that's not disciplined. And there's certain contexts in which you cannot be disciplined. You don't want to be undisciplined in litigation. And this is what happens. The problem with what the president said on Air Force One is that he shot himself in the foot, and he also threw Michael Cohen under the bus at the same time, not to mix the metaphors. And here's why. Because you can't enforce an agreement that you didn't know anything about and were not a party to. So he effectively proved his case, or our case, on Air Force One. And secondly,
oh, wait a second. He's always said that he didn't know about the agreement, and so did Michael Cohen. And there he just said it again.
Well, no, he's never said that before. That's the first time that
the White House has said that he didn't know anything.
Well, not exactly. I mean, there's been a lot of what I'll describe as White House speak on this issue. But now we have the president on video stating that he didn't know anything about the agreement. And the other reason why we were excited about this, that we're happy about it, is because it furthers our efforts to depose the president and Michael Cohen about what the president knew, when he knew it, and what he did about this $130,000 payment.
Yes, but again, he has always said, or the White House has, or Michael Cohen, that he didn't know anything. So how does that change anything, that he once again reiterated he didn't know anything?
Again, we have an admission from the president, a very damaging admission that is going to prove to be very problematic for him and Michael Cohen.
Okay, you tweeted out this weekend, expect a major announcement in the coming days regarding our efforts to identify the thug who threatened Miss Clifford, Stormy Daniels, in Las Vegas in 2011 to leave Trump alone while making reference to her little girl. You can run, but you can't hide. Hashtag thug search, serious consequences, basta. So, care to tell us what your major announcement is in terms of searching for this person? So
my client sat down with Lois Gibson. She's the foremost forensic artist in the world. She has the Guinness. She has a world record for the number of... ...harmful to our country. The TV and Twitter spat started last week when Kimmel mocked First Lady Melania's accent during a bit on his late-night show. The sparring got more personal and more vulgar before Kimmel's apology.